All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Andy Waple. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning for the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission. And I'd just like to welcome everybody to our SPC Transportation Improvement Program update for District 11, PennDOT District 11, which includes Allegheny, Beaver, and Lawrence counties, as well as the city of Pittsburgh. This meeting is being recorded, so if anybody has any questions or comments among the panel members, I would ask you to wait until after the presentation to make any comments or questions. And again, it's being recorded and we're also being live streamed on Facebook. So for those of you that can't attend, this will be posted to SPC's YouTube page at the conclusion of the meeting. So again, welcome everybody, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So today's agenda covers a number of topics. First and foremost, we're going to talk a little bit about the current TIP for fiscal years 2021 through 2024, a little glimpse into current funding as well as some recently completed projects. Then I'm going to turn it to my colleague Ryan Gordon to talk about the 2023 TIP development schedule. That includes timeline, public engagement thus far, and projects currently advancing. He's also going to talk about some other program updates, such as municipal outreach through PennDOT Connects, as well as some of our competitive funding programs. And then finally, Ryan's going to turn it back over to me to talk about funding issues at both the state and federal level, both problems and some potential solutions. So as we stand today, we're in federal fiscal year 2022, and this graph pie chart on your screen represents our current investments through our transportation improvement program. As you can see, it's about $1.57 billion in total, with about a third of that going to bridges, and the remainder of that going to different types of highway programs, multimodal and active transportation that funds things like sidewalks and bike lanes, funding for bus replacements, funding for the Pittsburgh to downtown bus rapid transit, and a host of other things. About $185.7 million for operational improvements such as turn lanes and traffic signal upgrades and traffic signal coordination, as well as things like dynamic messaging signs that you often see on I-376 on the Parkway East. And then about $157 million on safety projects. Those can range from guide rail replacements to systematic improvements like lane departure warning devices and rumble strips, to intersections improvements, to turn lane improvements, to reductions of curves and things like that. And then finally, we see funding for roadway reconstructions and new capacity, as well as some design and planning projects that are underway, and also landslide remediations at about $27 million. I will note that 1.57 that's is being invested right now is down a little bit from previous TIP years, and that's due to a number of factors in which we'll get into a little bit deeper into the presentation that are also going to affect the 2023 TIP that Ryan's going to talk about. Similarly, these are the public transportation investments, about $2.23 billion in total. The majority of that funding going to operations at about $1.6 billion. And then we have some capacity upgrades, again, funding from the transit side for the downtown to Oakland bus rapid transit project, purchasing of new buses and vehicles, as well as facility and equipment upgrades. Just to highlight a couple of the recently completed projects in PennDOT District 11. As you can see here, it ranged in Allegheny County in the city of Pittsburgh. It ranges from bridges to the interstate and de-icing systems. That's one of the safety projects that would fall into the safety funding that I talked about earlier. rollover detection systems to numerous projects that address active transportation components such as sidewalks and shared use paths, as well as trail connectors and street upgrades. Same with Beaver and Lawrence County. Again, just a whole host of different types of improvements ranging from highways and bridges to bicycle and pedestrian facilities and roadway upgrades. So that's just a snapshot of what's going on now and a few of the things that have been completed over the last 4 years since our last TIP update. As many of you know, the TIP is a 4-year program that allocates funding to the highest priority projects in the region. It's updated every 2 years. So it's on a continuous update cycle, and we amend it almost monthly. So when there's changes to project schedules or project scopes, we make amendments to move funding around to best accommodate all of the projects that we have programmed, and also to use our scarce state and federal funds most effectively in the region, and making sure that we're allocating every one of those dollars to these important projects. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ryden Gordon, who's going to talk about the TIP update that we're developing now that we're seeking your input on and that will be for years 2023 to 2026. So with that, go ahead, Ryan.
Thanks, Andy. So the next few slides, I'm going to be providing an overview of the 2023 TIP update, which we're right in the middle of, with numerous activities ongoing that are required to produce the draft TIP. We're producing the first versions of the pre-draft right now, and we'd like to provide this opportunity to the PPP with this session that provides a little bit of an update as to where we are a little more than halfway through this process. So you can see on the slide there, that's a general overview of a very complicated process. This generalized view of the process, like I said, takes over 1.5 years to complete, and it begins and ends and continuously includes public involvement. The overarching key element here to this process is that it's collaborative and that it's consensus driven. I might be the one up here, doing the presentation right now, but it's important to remember that there's over 90 professionals involved in this process from over 20 different organizations working together, with oversight from the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration, to produce the 4-year program of projects. You'll see here in the second box the TIP work group meetings, which in District 11, those members include SPC, PennDOT District 11 officials, Allegheny, Beaver, and Lawrence County staffs, City of Pittsburgh officials, Port Authority staff, and Allegheny County TMAs. So thanks goes out to everyone involved in the process that makes it truly collaborative. And on this graphic, you can see really the work of the TIP work group spans from the needs identification box all the way through to where it says pre-draft TIP. So the SPC then handles the environmental justice analysis, the air quality conformity analysis involved in the TIP, and then we hold a 30-day comment period on our way to the TIP adoption in June. Next slide, please. So this is a more complex view of the development. This is what we call our TIP timeline. And this is what we use at the TIP work group and within staff to make sure we're doing what we need to do in a timely manner. It's really, showing that almost 2-year time frame that's involved. And you can see here at the top, we have public involvement throughout. In the middle of this graph, there's a bunch of interrelated development milestones. And at the bottom really is the work of the TIP work groups as they develop the drafts of the TIP. So really all I wanted to show there was how interrelated things are and how much activity is going on at the same time. Next slide, please. So as you may notice with that timeline and with our process that there's multiple points along the way for public involvement. The TIP process really begins with the engagement of our committees, the notifications that we send out through various sources about the STC's 45-day comment period that was held in the spring. That's really the kickoff. From that, we've gathered over 600 comments about transportation in the SPC region. We gather this input from our own comments as well that come into us through either past public meetings or our formal comment period with the 21 TIP, or through avenues such as our website or email. So we look at all these comments together. We discuss them in our second TIP work group meetings. All comments are considered and we assign a status to the comments as we review them at the work groups. Next slide, please. So wanted to review some of the funding trends that we're seeing. The funding trend shown here on the chart at right is really starting with the 2015 TIP, showing all the way through to the TIP we're working on right now, which is the 2023 TIP. And it compares both year to year and our transit side versus the highway bridge side. Looking at the highway bridge side, there's a considerable downward trend. You can see there the region's base funding just since our last TIP is down 14%. So comparing what we have to work with on the 23 TIP compared to the 21 TIP, we're around 14% down. And this is mostly driven by the state's decisions to decrease regional funds in order to increase statewide funds to fund interstate projects. NHPP funding, which is the funding that is mostly involved in that transfer, if you look at that funding, just that funding compared to where we were on 21 TIP levels, we're down around about 30% for the whole region. And that puts us at really pre-Act 89 levels of funding for our region's TIP. Next slide, please. So, of course, the TIP is a mix, of federal and state funding. And so at the federal level, we're under FAST Act. We continue to be under FAST Act, which was the House of Representatives just extended a short-term extension of the FAST Act on October 28th. It's a short-term extension, extending it until December 3rd. Negotiations are, I'm sure you're aware of in the news, are ongoing with a larger infrastructure package and a reauthorization bill, which Andy's going to touch on here towards the end, but we're watching that very closely, as a lot of people are. But if you shift over to other reasons why our regional TIP is down, you have to consider the state funding. And right down that third bullet, you can see if you look at the entire state, we're $152 million less collected due to the COVID pandemic and its impact on gas tax receipts. So consequently, if you look right just at our region, at our state funds, you'll see that for just our highway state fund category is down 10%, and our state bridge funding for the region down 20%. That's comparing where we are with the 23 TIP update compared to what we had with 2021. Obviously, the state's continuing to invest in interstate, and there's one other thing I want to mention. That last bullet is really, the formulas have been tweaked to put more emphasis on increasing projects that have to do with preservation. So we're not just always evaluating who has the worst conditions and giving the money to that area. We're now balancing that out because we want to continue those preservation treatments that keep the good roads and good bridges in good shape. So next slide, please. So we've mentioned several times the interstate and the prioritization that the state has put on the interstate in terms of funding. And I don't think anyone would dispute, the importance of interstate highway investments and keeping that network, in good condition. The interstates, in Pennsylvania account for only 6% of the miles, but 26% of all traffic volume. But around 57% of the state's interstate is over 40 years old. So the situation in Pennsylvania, it's not unique even to the nation, because a lot of states are in this situation. It's really a nationwide problem with the age of the interstates. So there's a tremendous amount of funding needed to keep interstates in a good state of repair. And there's even more funding required if you're going to be starting to look at modernization of the interstate system. Also, performance measures that we utilize through our federal funding, are really prioritizing in interstate or national highway system investment. And on the long term, these are going to have impacts on our lower level networks in terms of condition. So next slide, please. So I just mentioned performance measures. Well, SPC's developed a comprehensive performance-based planning and programming process through collaboration with the US DOT and PennDOT to integrate the consideration of these measures in our TIP update. So when the TIP update, when the TIP document comes out in May for public comment, you'll see that we'll have an entire chapter dedicated to reporting on this current state of the performance measures in the region, and looking at the current TIP and how it helps us to achieve our targets in the areas of such as safety, asset management, system performance, and transit. So like I said, we're always detailing that. What is this TIP? What's its contribution to achieving those existing performance targets? You can also go to our website. This is actually just a snapshot of our website. You can go to our website here and get updates on the regional performance measures, where we're at on all the measures and what all of our targets are. So next slide, please. So even though funding is down, projects will continue, projects will advance, even if it's not at the rate that we'd probably prefer. So many of the projects shown here on this slide and the next slide are really you're going to continue to have funding. They're going to continue to make progress. It's just that they'll likely be in pre-construction phases, and funding for construction may be held off a year or two from what would be ideal or what we would expect under normal circumstances. So also keep in mind that none of these projects will be new to the TIP. All of these projects are on the current TIP in some phase or fashion. So this is just a list here of Beaver County here's Allegheny in the city, and then the next slide is just Beaver and Lawrence. Like I said, there's no new projects here. All these projects are already on the TIP, and in some phase. It's just we're attempting to continue to advance them. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at funding shortfalls like the ones that I demonstrated a few slides back, there's going to be impacts to projects. And looking at how much funding that it would take to continue the projects that are on the current TIP, that's also known as carryover. If you compare the carryover to what we have available for regional TIP funds, you'll get the shortfalls that are shown there in those red numbers. So you can see we're in a big hole in District 11 and for the region at large. What this will mean is some major projects are going to be significantly delayed. Construction will be pushed out beyond our tip years. And that's just a fact of where we are with our funding. We've put a sample of some major projects that would be significantly delayed. Now, we're still, of course, in the middle of working on this. So, we don't know for sure yet. We're still working a lot of different options and looking at a lot of different numbers here with what PennDOT's, got in line. So, there could be some changes of this, but we just wanted to put this out there as an example of some major projects that have significant delays with the shortfalls that we're under. So next slide, please. On the transit side, if you remember original funding chart, we're just under $1 billion, just under $2 billion in regional tip funding for transit. So the news there's a little bit better. We've got projects that are advancing, and of course, this is a list of some highlights of the Port Authority's transit projects. But like I said, we're continuing to advance these projects, and of course that includes the Pittsburgh to Oakland BRT, includes the typical stuff that we have on our transit tips, such as light rail vehicle replacement, also buses, replacing the bus fleet, purchasing new clean diesel buses. Obviously, there's always maintenance on the rail systems and the buses. And then we have our fixed guideway system that, of course, Port Authority is always improving and making renovations to. So it's all included on the transit side of the tip. That last bullet is just, there's federal operating assistance that that Port Authority gets for the things that are shown there. So it's I think much of the same type of activities as far as transit in Allegheny County. Next slide, please. And this is the same kind of list for both Beaver and the Newcastle area transit. And you can see there are projects that are advancing there. It's typical stuff, operating assistance, bus purchases, upgrades to existing facilities, maintenance of existing buses and facilities. And you'll see Beaver with upgrade hardware software for automated vehicle location systems. So a lot of good stuff, also on the transit tips coming in, and it's in the same stage of development really that the highway bridge side is in. Next slide, please. So just a couple updates here related to specialty programs under the tip and some upcoming tip development tasks. Next slide, please. The SPC staff is in the middle of running its process on two competitive funding programs, which we control the discretion on. And one is the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, or CMAQ, and the other one is the Regional Transportation Alternatives. Now, CMAQ, just to give you an update there, we are 2 meetings into a 4-meeting schedule that has us selecting the projects. We've got 16 candidate projects at around 47 million in requests. We are going to be in the neighborhood of 25 million to 35 million available. And once we get through the process of the selections and the evaluations, we will announce the projects in early December. On the TA side, similar, we're running an evaluation process right now of the 12 candidate projects that we got. The requests are topping $7 million. We've got approximately 3 million available. So it's competitive as always, and we're doing a great job of evaluating those projects right now. similar time frame in we will be making our announcements in early December on successful projects that have been approved for TA funding. Next slide, please. The PennDOT Connects process is ongoing. Just wanted to make sure we mentioned that. Overall, it's been very beneficial to municipalities and as well as PennDOT, SPC, and its partners. The projects on the tip go through this process of early interaction and kind of an information sharing with local municipalities on conditions and contextual needs associated with projects. Really allows PennDOT to kind of tweak designs and really make projects that can really, you know, help communities for many years to come. And just as a list of a few of the things that that are discussed when we, you know, when that PennDOT Connects outreach with communities and municipalities is conducted. Next slide, please. So really, this is just a wrap up of you know, what we've still got to do in the process. We've got a big milestone we're shooting for right now is by the end of the calendar year having a pre-draft tip put together and submitted through PennDOT. Like I said, we're in a lot of work stage right now on multiple fronts. Real busy time. We get into the spring, we'll nail down our project list, all the details, and we will conduct our air quality conformity. We will conduct our environmental justice analysis and prepare the draft documents for the formal 30-day public comment period, which is, you know, it'll be in the May timeframe. We'll announce we'll announce those dates when we get there, and then it's all leading towards that June 22nd commission meeting, June 2022 commission meeting where the tip will be considered for adoption and then take effect in October. So that's what we have remaining, and I think that does it for me. I'm gonna throw it back over to Andy to kind of give you an overview on what's going on multiple fronts and federal and state funding.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So Ryan highlighted some of the issues that we have with the state of transportation funding as it stands right now. So really, you know, as Ryan mentioned, federal funds that come through the Highway Trust Fund, as well as state funds that come through things like the gas tax and vehicle registrations and things like that are the main funding mechanisms that we use to fund all kinds of transportation projects, not only in southwestern Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth as a whole, but also across the country. So many of you have probably been, have heard in the news, there's a fairly substantial infrastructure package being discussed at the congressional level. So, you know, in hopes that that is passed, you know, in a timely manner, because as Ryan said, the current extension to our current funding bill ends in December. And, you know, we're kind of moving day to day and week to week here, not knowing if and when, you know, cash flow will end and projects will get shut down. So really a long-term funding bill is really sorely needed at this point. It's very difficult to program funds and to keep projects moving, you know, when from week to week, you don't know if there's going to be an authorization to spend federal money. So the current bill that's the infrastructure bill that's being considered right now would provide about $351 billion nationally for highways and bridges over 5 years, as well as $91 billion for public transportation and $66 billion for passenger rail, all over a 5-year period. So from 2022 to 2027. So it creates almost a $28 billion bridge program. It has a lot of money for electric vehicles, and it also has a lot of money for other things that you don't normally think of as transportation, but are beginning to emerge as new, really new forms of transportation, such as the provision of high-speed internet or broadband internet. There's about $60 billion for that, so included in the proposed bill. So one of the things, even though it does provide a 5-year stable funding source, one of the things it does not do is address the insolvency of the Highway Trust Fund. So the Highway Trust Fund relies primarily on the federal gas tax, which is at 18.4 cents a gallon. That hasn't been raised since 1993. So really, if you think back, you think to 1993, you were getting 18.4 cents a gallon. You factor in the inflation with that. So really today, with the buying power of that 18.4 cents a gallon is really at about 10 cents a gallon. So that's, that's not a good thing. So there, the use of gas tax is not a sustainable way to continue to fund transportation. People are driving less, and as more people telework, and the people that are driving are buying increasingly more fuel efficient cars. So they're using less gasoline, or buying hybrid or electric vehicles, which some, of course, don't use any gasoline and don't pay anything into the system, because, you charge at home, or you charge at, one of the charging stations at Sheetz or at your office or something like that, and it doesn't pay anything into the transportation system. So to really to fix the issue at the federal level, we need something that does not rely on gas taxes. And the same can be said at the state level as well. And the states has, as you'll see in a slide or two here, has started to take some steps to identify different mechanisms other than a gas tax to fund transportation. So with that, the Highway Trust Fund is nearly broke. It's running on a year-to-year basis. And included in this $351 billion that's included in the infrastructure bill, that includes about $118 billion transfer from the general fund. So that's not a sustainable way to fund transportation. So about 90 billion of that would go to the highway account, and about 28 to the mass transit account. And also it needs to be recognized, these last 2 points here, that only addresses a small portion of our unmet funding needs. So PennDOT's yearly budget for all things transportation is about $8.8 billion a year, whereas the real need for everything is about $18.5 billion a year. So there's just a tremendous shortfall in transportation funding, and things like when Act 89 was passed back in 2013, the current state funding legislation for transportation, it also is written into that bill that a substantial amount of funding goes to the Pennsylvania State Police to fund their operations out of the motor license fund. No one's disagreeing that the Pennsylvania State Police are very important, and they should be funded, but is the motor license fund the right place to take that funds out? As it stands right now, it's about $600 million or a little more every year that comes out of the motor license fund that should be used to fund transportation, that goes to the state police. And also on the transit side, the Act 89 was passed back in 2013. There are provisions in that sunset at the end of this state fiscal year in June to fund public transportation. Right now, the Pennsylvania Turnpike pays PennDOT $450 million a year to help public transportation. At the end of June this year, if nothing is done, that payment will be reduced to $50 million a year from the Turnpike Commission. And as it's written, it says that funding, that $400 million, will come from the state general fund. We're skeptical that that'll actually happen. So it's really critical right now, just as in bridges and highways, it's really also just as critical that something happens on the public transportation side as well in the state legislature. And just the last note on that, if there is a substantial increase, which you can see here in the next slide, what the infrastructure bill may mean to Pennsylvania. you know, we won't be able to match these federal funds with our existing state funding that we have coming in now. Typically, state funds require a 20% match, 80%. So out of your 100% of a project cost, it's typically 80% federal and 20% state. So we won't even be able to match the additional funds coming into the Commonwealth with the existing funding that's generated by the motor license fund, and you know, that goes to the state police. So you know, again, you know, we really need movement on both fronts here, both at the federal level and at the state legislature level to really address this problem. You know, right now, in federal funds under the current authorization, we receive about $1.8 billion a year in federal funding for highways and bridges. This is again federal, and 425 million in federal transit funds. So with the new infrastructure bill, it could potentially bring 3.9 billion in new funds to Pennsylvania over the life of the program. And as you can see there, that equates to about 466, an average of about 466 million a year on the highway side, and about $320 million a year on, I'm sorry, $208 million a year on the transit side. So I mentioned some things that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was doing to help to begin to discuss and explore different ways to fund transportation across the Commonwealth. And two of those things are a couple of companion reports that were both put out within the last year here. So the Pennsylvania Transportation Revenue Options Commission, which was made up of a number of folks from across the Commonwealth, representing state and local governments, the transportation industries, the environmental industry, the energy industry, just a whole host of different folks were brought together to develop a phased approach to look at transportation funding from to take us forward, you know, to get off the reliance of gas tax. And there's recommendations. It's a menu of recommendations and options. They include tolling, user fees, redirection of funds. I had mentioned the Pennsylvania State Police, fees for vehicle registration, fees for electric vehicles, fees for rental vehicles and lease vehicles, taxes or fees on transportation network companies such as Lyft and Uber. So every time you took a ride in a Lyft or an Uber, a portion of that would go towards transportation funding, as well as fees on deliveries. So, you know, as everybody knows, and you know, over the past year, especially with COVID and the pandemic, a lot of people were ordering off online. Through Amazon or different avenues. A lot of the brick and mortar stores offer online ordering and delivery. So there's just been a tremendous uptick in the deliveries of goods and services and packages over the past year. And then secondly, they've undertaken it's called a planning and environmental linkage study to look at alternative funding situations and alternative funding scenarios. I had mentioned, you know, already about, you know, fuel-based taxes support most of our infrastructure. We had talked about inflation, you know, with Pennsylvania having a substantial gas tax, it's still not indexed for inflation. So every year, the Pennsylvania gas tax loses about $100 million in buying power. So with that, you know, this report digs a little bit deeper into the Revenue Options Commission recommendations. It looks at again at the three-phase approach. A lot of these are a little bit different than the taxes and fees. The three-phase approach here, it does dig into those a little bit, but it also recommends some other things that can be done. For example, in the short term, it talks about bridge tolling or managed lanes, so high occupancy travel lanes, things HOT or high occupancy toll lanes. If you're familiar, you see them all around Washington, D.C. and in parts of Florida and parts of Texas. in parts of Maryland. You know, in the medium term, it looks at congestion pricing. So looking at variable toll rates on different interstates throughout the Commonwealth at different times of day. So if you choose to travel, you know, at peak hours, you know, say from 7 to 9 in the morning or 3 to 5 in the afternoon, you're going to pay a higher rate on those toll facilities, and they're dynamic. So they change based on the level of congestion. And then in the long term, it looks at corridor tolling, and things like that we talked about in the Revenue Options Commission, such as taxes and fees, mileage-based user fees. So with mileage-based user fees, that would be, you know, it's the technology is not quite worked out yet. It's still a few to 5-10 years away, but essentially, you know, for example, every time you filled up at the gas pump, you would enter your mileage, and it would calculate a rate based on what you entered at the last fill up, and that would be your tax. Or alternatively, you might have this little like plug-in into your ODB port on your car, and it would automatically register your mileage, and you would be sent a bill every month or every quarter or whatever the time interval may be. So that would be in lieu of the gas tax. So your gas tax that you pay at the pump right now, or is actually it's paid at the wholesale level, would go away, and then it would be mileage based. So the more you drive, the more you pay. So one of the things that's going on right now as a part of this planning environmental linkage study is, and I'm sure you've heard about it in the news, is the Major Interstate Bridge Tolling Initiative. It's a public-private partnership that's being proposed, and there's 9 locations across the geographically distributed across the Commonwealth. There is one project located in District 11 in the southwestern Pennsylvania region, and that is an I-79 near the Bridgeville interchange. So there is a lot of opposition to this initiative at both the legislative level and at the local level. You know, at the legislative level, our delegation is concerned that that this is kind of usurping their authority as it was approved by the PennDOT P3 board and not the legislature. And at the local level, it's there's a lot of municipalities and local governments and residents that are concerned of, you know, what this is going to do to their local roadways. So people getting off of I-79 and traveling on the local roadways to avoid the tolls. There's a lot of, especially in this area, those of you that are familiar with Bridgeville and Route 50 and this area, it's a very congested area, and folks are very concerned that it's going to make it even worse. And they're also concerned that, you know, it's placing the burden on of the tolls and paying for this on the local residents who may use this facility every day. PennDOT, I will say that, you know, PennDOT is moving forward with this and starting design and starting to look at impacts on local roadways, regardless of the funding stream. So this is a good, well-needed project to upgrade these interchanges and upgrade these bridges. As they are in dire need of upgrade. They've outlived their useful service life, and the Bridgeville interchange is an outdated design. It was never designed to handle as much traffic as it is handling now. So PennDOT is pursuing this project and looking in design and looking at impacts to local roadways. And eventually it will get funded regardless of whether it is a toll project or not. So if it doesn't end up to be a toll facility like it's being proposed in this initiative, you know, it's going to take a lot longer to take place and do, owing to our funding issues with transportation in general. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that, and you know, again, just make it aware that it's going to get done sooner or later, but the tolling option would allow it to get done much sooner. And with that, that's all that we had tonight. And again, I want to thank everybody listening out there and watching. And I'd be happy to, Ryan and I and any of the representatives on the line from PennDOT or any of the counties or the city of Pittsburgh would be happy to answer any questions that may be out there posted in the Facebook chat. So Jared, do we have any questions?
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Okay, so with that, you know, this is being recorded and it's going to be posted on SPC's YouTube page. So those out there that were unable to attend, that are interested in learning, can go out and watch it, and then they can relay any questions to us at SPC, and we'll ensure they get answered by the appropriate person. So with that, if there's no questions or comments from the panel that I have here on the webinar with me, we can go ahead and conclude the meeting this evening. And again, I just want to thank everybody for watching and for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us at any time through email. There's an online public comment form on our website, and a lot of interactive mapping and a lot of information on the SPC website. And again, we welcome public comment at any time. You know, we really like to get out to the counties and talk to folks in their backyards. But with the you know, the lingering effects of COVID and everything like that, you know, it's more efficient and you know, probably safer for us to hold these meetings virtually. We really hope that we're going to be able to get out and visit each one of our counties in the spring. Look for us, you know, probably mid-May to mid-June out in your county to come out and talk to you about the draft tip update. So with that, and again, thanks everybody, and that will conclude our meeting this evening.
Thank you, Andy. That was an excellent presentation. You and Ryan both did a very nice job.
Thank you. Do we know if we had any people attending tonight?
Any members of the public?
Yes.
Jared, I'm going to defer that question to you.
So we were looking at anywhere between about 25 to 20. Like, it just fluctuated throughout, but I was watching it. So
Okay, great.
about
All
20
right.
to 25 people watching.
You mean on the Facebook live stream?
Yep.
Great.
Okay, great.
And we are going to be
Thank you.
out in we're going to be out visiting Amy and Lawrence on Tuesday as well. So if any of you are so inclined to take a trip to Lawrence County and want to see us in person, we'll be there at 11:30 on Wednesday. So, and thanks, Amy, for inviting us up.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, good job, Andy. Ryan,
Appreciate it.
thanks,
you.
guys.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Safe.